When fortunes change hands across a poker table, the real victory isn't always measured in money. What you're about to witness is the most expensive lesson in human dignity ever taught, a story where losing $50,000 became the foundation for gaining something priceless. This isn't just about gambling. This is about how authentic character reveals itself when everything is at stake, and why respect is the only currency that truly matters. Subscribe now for more incredible stories where financial loss led to spiritual gain. These tales of character and consequence will change how you think about what wealth really means. What happens when Hollywood's most confident gambler risks everything he owns in a single poker game and discovers that some victories can only come through defeat? On September 12, 1960, at Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound, GlennFord sat down to the highest-stakes poker game of his life with $50,000, his entire life savings, and the absolute confidence that his superior skill would guarantee victory. By dawn, he had lost everything, but gained something far more valuable than money could ever buy. This is the extraordinary true story of the most expensive lesson in dignity ever taught. September 12, 1960, 8:30 p.m. Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound was buzzing with the sophisticated energy of Hollywood's elite gathering for what had become a legendary monthly poker game that attracted the entertainment industry's most competitive personalities and serious players. The setting was elegant but masculine, a custom-built card room with leather chairs, crystal decanters, and a professional dealer's table that had hosted some of the most significant gambling sessions in entertainment history. GlennFord arrived that evening with unusual confidence, carrying a leather briefcase that contained $50,000 in cash, not just his gambling stake for the evening, but literally every dollar he had managed to save during 15 years of successful film career. At 44, Ford was at the peak of his earning power and celebrity status, but he was also facing financial pressures that he had hidden from everyone except his accountant. Expensive divorces, poor investment decisions, and an extravagant lifestyle had depleted most of his career earnings, leaving him with assets that looked impressive on paper, but cash resources that were dangerously limited. Glenn was living beyond his means, and had been for years, recalled his business manager, William Harkness, in private notes that weren't revealed until after Ford's death. He made enormous salaries, but spent even more, and by 1960, he was essentially gambling with money he couldn't afford to lose. But Ford's confidence that evening wasn't based on desperation. It was built on genuine skill and a track record of poker success that had made him one of the most feared players in Hollywood's gambling circles. Glenn was legitimately good at poker, remembered Dean Martin, who had played with Ford dozens of times. He understood odds, he could read people, and he had the discipline to fold when he should. But more than that, he had the killer instinct that separates serious players from recreational gamblers. The other players that evening included Frank Sinatra himself, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, and significantly, Sammy Davis Jr., who had gained reputation as a formidable poker player despite being known primarily for his entertainment versatility. Sammy brought a different energy to poker games, recalled Joey Bishop. Most of us played with calculated aggression or cool discipline. Sammy played with intuition and psychology that seemed to come from a completely different place. The game began with standard stakes, $100 ante, $500 minimum bet, that allowed for significant wins and losses while maintaining civilized boundaries that wouldn't threaten long-term friendships among the players. For the first 3 hours, Ford played with his characteristic precision and discipline, winning more hands than he lost, and gradually building his stack while carefully observing the other players, patterns and tells. Glenn was having a good night early on, Dean Martin recalled. He was up maybe 8 or 10,000, playing smart, staying patient. But something changed around midnight, and his whole approach shifted. The change came during a hand where Ford held 3 kings, a strong hand that would win most poker situations, but was vulnerable to the few combinations that could beat it. The betting escalated rapidly, as Sammy raised and re-raised with the kind of aggression that suggested either an exceptionally strong hand or a masterful bluff designed to steal a large pot through pure intimidation. Ford faced the decision that would define the entire evening: fold a strong hand and accept a moderate loss, or call Sammy's bet and risk a substantial portion of his stake on the strength of 3 kings. "This is where poker psychology becomes everything," explained professional gambler Nick the Greek, who observed the game as Sinatra's guest. Glenn had to decide whether Sammy was bluffing with weakness or betting with strength, and that decision would determine whether he won big or lost everything. Ford chose to call, committing $15,000 to the pot, a substantial bet that represented nearly 1/3 of his entire bankroll. Sammy's response was to raise again, pushing the pot to over $40,000 and forcing Ford into an even more difficult decision with even higher stakes. At that point, Glenn was pot committed, recalled Dean Martin. He'd put so much money in that folding would mean accepting a huge loss, but calling meant risking most of his remaining stake on a single hand. Ford called the final bet, bringing the total pot to $52,000, more money than many Americans earned in 5 years. When the cards were revealed, Sammy showed a full house, 3 aces and 2 kings, that beat Ford's 3 kings decisively and completely. The silence in that room was deafening, Joey Bishop remembered. Glenn had just lost more money than most people see in a lifetime, and everyone understood that this wasn't just gambling money. This was serious financial damage. Ford's reaction to losing $50,000 in a single hand revealed the character that would transform a devastating financial loss into something much more significant. Instead of anger, recrimination, or the emotional breakdown that might have been expected, Ford simply nodded, extended his hand to Sammy in congratulations, and said, "Well played. You read the situation perfectly." The grace Ford showed in defeat was so remarkable that it immediately changed the atmosphere in the room from tension to respect. "Glenn's reaction to losing everything was the most impressive thing I've ever seen at a poker table," Sinatra recalled years later. "Most men would have been furious or devastated. Glenn just accepted it like a gentleman and complimented Sammy on superior play." But Sammy's response to Ford's gracious defeat was even more remarkable, and would transform the evening from a simple gambling session into a lesson about character that none of the participants would ever forget. As Ford prepared to leave, having lost his entire stake and having no money left to continue playing, Sammy asked him to wait a moment. "Glenn," Sammy said, "I want to talk to you about something before you go." What followed was a private conversation that took place while the other players continued their game at reduced stakes, but the conversation's impact would influence Ford for the rest of his life. "Sammy asked me about my situation," Ford recalled years later. "Not in a way that was embarrassing or intrusive, but with genuine concern about whether losing that money would create serious problems for me." Ford's honesty about his financial circumstances, admitting that the $50,000 represented his entire liquid assets and that its loss would create genuine hardship, triggered a response from Sammy that demonstrated character as impressive as Ford's gracious defeat. "I can't take this money knowing it represents everything you have," Sammy said, pushing the $52,000 in winnings back toward Ford. "Poker is supposed to be entertainment between friends, not financial destruction of someone I respect." Ford's initial response was to refuse Sammy's gesture, understanding that accepting the money back would compromise his dignity and turn his gambling loss into charity. "I lost it fair and square," Ford told Sammy. "You played better than I did, and you deserve to keep what you won." But Sammy's explanation for wanting to return the money revealed a philosophy about wealth, friendship, and human dignity that transcended simple gambling etiquette. "Glenn," Sammy said, "I've been poor, and I've been rich, and I've learned that money is just a tool for creating possibilities, but dignity is something you can never buy back once you've lost it." Sammy continued, "If I keep this money knowing it will cause you genuine hardship, then I'm profiting from your pain rather than your poor judgment. That's not the kind of victory I want." The conversation that followed lasted over an hour and revealed both men's philosophies about money, friendship, and the difference between winning and succeeding. "Sammy told me that real wealth wasn't about accumulating money, but about being able to help people you respect when they need help, Ford recalled. He said that keeping my $50,000 would make him richer in dollars but poorer in character. Ford's counterargument was that accepting the money back would compromise his own character by turning a legitimate gambling loss into unearned charity that he hadn't requested and didn't deserve. This was one of the most sophisticated discussions about ethics and dignity I've ever witnessed, recalled Frank Sinatra, who eventually joined the conversation. Both men were arguing from principles that were completely correct, but completely contradictory. The resolution came when Sammy proposed a compromise that would allow Ford to keep his dignity while accepting help in a way that preserved both men's character. Instead of giving you back your gambling losses, Sammy suggested, what if I loan you money to get back on your feet financially, with the understanding that you'll repay me when your situation improves? The loan structure would allow Ford to accept financial help without compromising his dignity, while giving Sammy a way to assist a friend without turning legitimate gambling winnings into charity. It was brilliant, Frank Sinatra observed. Sammy found a way to help Glenn without making him feel like a charity case, and Glenn found a way to accept help without feeling like he was taking unearned money. But Ford's response to Sammy's offer revealed character that impressed even the man who was trying to help him. "Sammy," Ford said, "I appreciate your offer more than you'll ever know. But I got myself into this situation through poor judgment, and I need to get myself out of it through better decisions." Ford's refusal to accept either the returned winnings or the proposed loan demonstrated a commitment to personal responsibility that earned him respect that far exceeded anything money could have purchased. "That was the moment when GlennFord became someone I genuinely admired," Sammy reflected years later. He was willing to face the consequences of his mistakes rather than let friendship shield him from reality. But Sammy wasn't finished trying to find a way to help Ford that would preserve both men's dignity while addressing Ford's genuine financial crisis. "Glenn," Sammy said, "if you won't let me help you directly, will you let me help you indirectly by creating opportunities for you to help yourself?" What Sammy proposed was using his industry connections and influence to help Ford secure better film roles, more lucrative contracts, and additional income opportunities that would allow him to rebuild his finances through work rather than charity. "Sammy offered to recommend me for parts, introduce me to producers, and use his relationships to create opportunities," Ford recalled. "It was a way of helping that preserved my dignity, because any success would come from my own work and talent." Ford accepted Sammy's offer of professional assistance because it represented help that had to be earned rather than simply received. Over the following 2 years, Sammy's introductions and recommendations led directly to 3 major film roles that re-established Ford's career momentum and provided the income necessary to rebuild his financial security. "Sammy never took credit for helping Glenn get those roles," recalled producer Hal Wallace, who cast Ford in 2 of the films. "He just made sure the right people knew Glenn was available and let Ford's talent do the rest." But the most significant result of that poker game wasn't financial recovery. It was a friendship based on mutual respect that lasted for the rest of both men's lives. "That night changed everything about how I thought about money, friendship, and what really matters," Ford reflected years later. "I lost $50,000, but I gained a friend whose character taught me more about success than any amount of money could have." The poker game became legendary among Hollywood's entertainment elite as an example of how character could be revealed and strengthened through crisis rather than compromised by it. "Everyone who was there that night knew they'd witnessed something special," Dean Martin recalled. "It wasn't just a poker game. It was a demonstration of how good men handled bad situations." For Sammy, Ford's gracious acceptance of defeat and refusal to accept unearned assistance confirmed his belief that dignity was the most valuable currency in any relationship. "Glenn taught me that night that helping someone means respecting their character enough to let them solve their own problems," Sammy observed. "Real friendship isn't about preventing people from facing consequences. It's about supporting them while they face those consequences with dignity." The financial lessons Ford learned from losing everything in a single poker game influenced his money management for the rest of his career, leading to more conservative spending and better investment decisions that provided genuine financial security. "Losing that $50,000 was the best thing that ever happened to my financial planning," Ford admitted years later. It taught me the difference between being rich and being wealthy, and it showed me that my most valuable assets couldn't be lost at a poker table. For both men, the evening demonstrated that authentic friendship could survive financial crisis, and that character revealed under pressure was worth more than money won or lost in any gambling situation. That poker game proved that Glenn and Sammy were both exactly the kind of men you'd want as friends, Frank Sinatra reflected. Glenn showed how to lose with dignity, and Sammy showed how to win with character. Neither of them compromised their principles for money, and both of them earned something more valuable than anything they could have won at cards. Years later, when Ford achieved genuine financial security through careful career choices and conservative money management, he hosted an annual poker game at his own home, where the stakes were limited and the focus was on friendship rather than gambling. Glenn learned that poker was supposed to be entertainment, not financial warfare, recalled Joey Bishop, who attended those games regularly. He kept the fun but eliminated the danger, which was probably the wisest thing he learned from losing everything to Sammy. The September 12, 1960 poker game ended at dawn with Ford financially devastated but spiritually enriched, having learned that dignity could never be lost at a poker table because it existed independently of any external circumstances. Most importantly, the evening proved that some victories could only be achieved through defeat, and that the most valuable lessons in life often came with the highest price tags but provided returns that could never be measured in money.